The purpose of today's session is to refreshen the awareness and maybe the call to action on why we need to continue to prepare for the digital transformation. So why is this becoming more urgent? As most of you know, in the industry, in the last 10 years or so, we've enjoyed a very continuous and prosperous time for data center infrastructure deployment. According to some, this footprint in the last 10 years is going to double in the next 2 to 3 years. We okay? So the business is strong and the marketing trends will continue. Some of those trends being increased connectivity, autonomy at the edge, certainly machine learning. So this will continue to put more burden on the existing infrastructure, but this then raises the question, does the current deployment of technology and data center infrastructure, is it ready for the veracity of data that's coming its way from a compute standpoint? So what we're talking about this morning from a JPT perspective, we talk about monetizing data. And when we talk about that, what we're really trying to do is get the data platformed in such a way that it's more actionable, allowing us for more quick and more intelligent decision making. So if I was to back up and articulate the problem statement today, I think with the help of Joe and Diraj, what we're looking at doing is addressing the following problem statement. As we get further into design, operation, and maintenance of the data center envelope, we need to ensure that we start to mobilize away from more of a static parameter mindset and more into a dynamic, collaborative platform where problem solving can be accomplished by multiple people at the same time, looking at possible real-time solutions and problems, okay? And sometimes even from different perspectives. So with that being said, I'd like to introduce myself as Mark Bidinger, President for the Cloud and Service Provider segment inside of Schneider Electric, one of our fastest and largest segments, thanks to many of you in this room. And to simplify the mission of my team, it's to work with customers, transcending a lot of the domains and technologies of Schneider's, crossing the borders and boundaries to make sure that we're bringing a seamless experience to our customers. Taking that outside-in approach allows us to bring the customer knowledge back to my company, the larger organization, where we then continue to build a sustainable pipeline of innovation and solution capability. So I have two terrific logos on stage with me, and better yet, two terrific people. And as you look at those logos, some of the nuances I'd like you to consider as we get further into the dialogue is the following. They are both into hyperscale deployment of data centers. One, however, will build a larger megawatt per footprint in fewer locations. That person is also in more control of the end-to-end process from an autonomy standpoint. The other gentleman will be into hyperscale deployment with the same velocity and scale, but maybe a smaller footprint in megawatt per site, certainly in more sites in the world, and by the very nature of being a provisioner, has to work with others on that end-to-end process inside of his envelope. So with that being said, I'd like to introduce Diraj Bamola from Equinix, Senior Vice President for Construction and a few other things. And I have to look at my notes now because the one thing I asked them for was short bios, but hopefully you'll understand the pedigree on stage with me in a second. So Diraj is responsible for end-to-end deployment of all major expansions in over 50 plus markets, including under his direct responsibility, it's major capital equipment and energy procurement, which you co-lead, I suppose, as well as environmental sustainability. An industry stalwart, Diraj joined Equinix a little over 10 years ago.
Just going on 10.
Going on 10. And something that I'd like to share with you is Diraj's commitment to delivering innovation at global scale, global agility, incrementally, of course, but also developing high-performance teams. And I think you've spent a lot of time in Western Europe recently working on some of that. Next, I'd like to introduce Mr. Joe Kava from Google. And I have to look at my notes again. So, Joe is Vice President of Global Data Centers, and he leads a team that's responsible for many facets inside the Google theater, from site selection, power purchasing, research, engineering, construction management, critical facility operations, hardware operations, environmental health and safety, sustainability, physical security for Google's entire global fleet of data centers. Joe also joined Google a little over 10 years ago.
11 and a half.
Okay. Little over 10. 10 plus 1's 11. And two things about Joe. He's been recognized recently in our industry as one of the highest achievers in sustainability a few months ago in Monaco. And the other thing I think that might surprise some of you from a perspective of Google is Joe's very interested in sharing some of the pioneering work that Google's done on data center efficiency with the industry itself on behalf. So with that, Joe, I'd like you to maybe introduce yourself a little bit more from a perspective of where is Google in the digital journey? When did you start it and why? Some challenges, and what do you see as the road ahead?
Okay, thanks, Mark. About 11 and a half years ago, when I joined Google, we were already building our own data centers, but we were in limited locations, primarily in a few sites in North America and then a couple sites in Europe. You hear me okay?
I can't hear. Go ahead.
No? Okay, good. All right, so at that time, we were probably like almost everyone in the audience. You know, we started facility operations on mostly a calendar-based schedule, you know, doing preventative maintenance on a typical time-based schedule and doing it a little bit clumsily. And we knew that that wasn't going to work, so we embarked on kind of what Mark calls the digital journey. And we the first step of that was to change from a time-based maintenance schedule to a reliability-centered maintenance schedule to try and take the human variability out of the equation. Anytime you go into a piece of the equipment, a piece of critical switchgear, there's a potential to introduce human error, frankly. And you might have been along the, you know, that bathtub curve where you have infant mortality, then you get into really good reliability, and then as things start to age, it starts to go up in failures again. You might have been in that really sweet spot, but you brought everything back to a potential of infant mortality if you had to get in there and do some critical maintenance. So we started targeting keeping everything in the middle of that bathtub curve and not allowing maintenance to happen that didn't have to happen. Well, then, you know, the natural progression is we want to get into predicted maintenance. And that requires a tremendous amount of data. And so you might, you know, kind of figured that Google is pretty data obsessed. And we have been gathering data on everything. We instrument pretty much everything from the IT stack all the way to the critical infrastructure. But we weren't using the data much. Except for if there was a failure, we would go back and mine the data, try and figure out what happened. So one of our engineers came up with the idea of using a machine learning model and training it on the data and doing it for two things. One, to improve the energy efficiency and see if we could set up the cooling plants in a more efficient way for what we were doing. And two, then can we also use that same data to predict when a piece of equipment was going to fail? So now, fast forward a few years down this journey, and almost 100% of our facilities not only are using machine learning to optimize the cooling plant, but they're under fully autonomous operation, meaning that the machine learning model runs once every 5 minutes and optimizes, and it's directly tied into our control system so that it is changing the parameters of the cooling plant almost in real time, about every 5 minutes based on the changing IT loads based on the changing weather conditions, about 19 independent variables that are looked at. It's just physically impossible for a human to calculate that and optimize the cooling plant in real time. But for servers, it's pretty trivial. So this is kind of where we're at now. And now we have the ability to, with most of our critical equipment, predict when maintenance is going to be required well in advance. So now it's scheduled, and it truly is more of a predictive maintenance model. But that takes a tremendous commitment to data, and it has to be in a platform that enables you to do that data mining and then put it into a machine learning algorithm or something like that.
Thanks, Joe. Diraj, Genesis, ideation, journey, success to date.
Yes, I think when I think back over the last few years and I think forward over the coming years, to me it is really the essence of the game, if you like, is about how we deliver at scale, intensity, and dispersion. And scale, we know, is megawatts in our industry. It's dollars out the door. Intensity is the number of concurrent projects or initiatives we have going on. In our case, and certainly in your case, the number of customers and the complexity around these customers, especially as they continue their digital journey. And then finally, dispersion. Is doing all of this in our case, 50 markets across the world. So, a lot of where I have spent my time and energy, and I think will continue to do going forward, is how to mold the right solutions, delivery solutions in my case, that underpin this core challenge: scale, intensity, and dispersion.
All right, thank you. So there's many key success factors inside of this journey. The three that we're going to focus on between now and the next 30 minutes or so is, where does that platforming of data happen? How does this whole digital journey, how does it impact standardization, starting with design, operation, and maintenance of the theater? And then certainly, and lastly, which is already, I think, stressful in our industry today, is how does the emergent technology, along with some of the geographical dispersion that Diraj just talked about, how does that impact the talent pool going forward? So, my hands are very full. So if we look at this slide then, as we just listened to Diraj and Joe, clearly in order for them to continue their companies down this digital journey, they need to rely on a very solid and reliable foundation. So one of the core commitments of Schneider is that commitment to the highest availability of critical technologies in a long line of award-winning products and solutions, from medium to low voltage, UPS, software, and certainly, and probably more importantly going forward, digital services. So clearly, as you heard John Pascal this morning, we believe that the world is always on. We believe that the world is getting more connected, and we also feel that the appetite to access goods and services is going to continue to hasten and grow. So with that being stated, what we've done at Schneider is we've tailored an instance of some of our decades-long and deep expertise of certain domains. So the first one I'll start with briefly is the EcoStruxure power. And this is where, regardless of size of data center, we can bring ultimate and maximize efficiencies from the powertrain from both the medium, low voltage through the UPS switchgear. Secondly, then, we have, coupled with it very closely, is the EcoStruxure IT, where we have fast and reliable infrastructure that helps our customers put their IT capacity in place and quickly. And then, lastly, we have EcoStruxure Building, where we have smart, sustainable systems that integrate and create a lot of the efficiency inside the building envelope itself, which actually helps reduce speed to market, increases scalability, and mitigates risk at the same time. So then for those of you that have never seen this slide before, this is what it looks like. And I think what's key, and Joe and Diraj are going to talk about this in a little bit on this slide, is I want to start with a very proud disclaimer. This is an open, interoperable system. This is not an architecture that's reserved for only Schneider technology. What's key about this, regardless of where you and your company are in this journey, is we need to make sure that whatever products you have on that bottom line, they need to be smart. And that's where your monetization journey starts. So they need to then, in our case, we simplify it. We start to push the data up into what we call the edge, which is where the on-premise autonomy still is allowed to be managed. But certainly we can push the data up to the cloud where we have analytics taking over, and certainly some of the predictive maintenance that Joe was talking about, eliminating windshield time and a lot of other inefficiencies, even from a green sustainable standpoint. So what I'd like to do then is have, without any secret sauce being shared, I'd like Joe to talk about a little bit where you've deployed some Schneider technologies and perhaps where you've deployed other solutions that meet your overall ambitions at Google.
Yeah, sure. So I think many people probably know that we're pretty well vertically integrated. So we build our own software that runs on the servers that we have manufactured for us. We build a lot of our own storage stacks and our networking, and then of course a lot of the cooling infrastructure that integrates with our racks is designed and built for us in-house. And we tend to also do a lot of our own software control systems. So you might think, well, where does Schneider fit into this equation with all of that vertical integration? But the fact is that Mark touched on a really key point there, and it's the interoperability that you touched on and the openness of your solution. So we need to have the data gateways that is helping us gather information about our critical power and cooling systems. So, you know, using the Modicom controllers and having all of that roll up into the PSO overlay for us has been a real key benefit in helping us to gain the kind of the deep insights into the facilities. Right, our facilities, a typical data center campus for us looks like a high voltage substation on campus that we have built for us. Multiple buildings, very large scale, you know, tens and hundreds of megawatts potentially in a campus, and so, you know, it's a very, very large industrial factory setting. And so my vision is taking this to industrial factory automation and using the data that we're gathering through a lot of the systems that we've deployed. We're able to do that in conjunction with our own machine learning algorithms that we built. So the biggest thing about getting to that layer of predictability or to that factory automation and having a vision of using a machine learning or an AI algorithm to help with that, or even using like a digital twin, having a full 3D and 4D representation of your designs to help the operators know exactly where the problems are and identify what needs to be done. You can imagine if you're looking at a campus that big, suppose that a main breaker in the substation trips. Now, you've got branch circuit monitoring down to every single rack and every single circuit. You now just had a cascade of tens of thousands of errors thrown, and the operators have no idea what's going on. So the PSO overlay for us enabled them to use some smart diagnostics and correlation analysis and say, that's the common thread. That's what's happening. Now the operators can go from a matter of tens of minutes troubleshooting to figure out what's going on to 10 seconds, they know exactly what they have to go and work on. So that type of smarts intelligence is it's critical. It's mission critical for us to be able to do that, to provide the type of reliability and you know, uptime of our cloud and other internal Google services. So it's all part of that journey, that vision of how do you use the data, how do you gather the data, have it in a platform in which you can cleanse the data and mine it to then put it to good use for you. And that's one of the things that I think that your EcoStruxure platform should help enable most of the big industrial users. And I just look at these as industrial factories. These are just digital bit factories. That's all they are.
Fans and blowers. Thank you, Joe. Diraj?
I'd probably start by saying, firstly, it's hard to avoid using Schneider, right?
No matter how hard you try.
Before we set upon a very deliberate framework partnership, we were already using you guys. You turn over a rock anywhere in any construction project.
I've been referred to worse, by the way.
And you find Mark Bidinger and a bit of Schneider. But you're prevalent is the point. But then I'd say in the last 3-4 years, focusing on design and construction, we've really deliberately sought to put in a structured framework with you as a partner, such that you're now pretty much, I'd say, both critical path and critical spine. The two things, which I'm particularly excited about is the use of your control systems and power distribution units. And the work we've done with you and your team, some of you around here, in really standardizing that as much as we can, to a SKU level all over the world for us. And the work done there. Secondly, I think, and this is relatively new, but we're, and I should look at our Chief Procurement Officer and probably see that she nods her head that I can say this, but we're committed to Wonderware, which is the Schneider, essentially sort of, call it what you want, but monitoring control platform. So, and that's also a very sort of exciting proposition in terms of what we want to accomplish going forward.
So very generous. Joe, you were going to say something maybe?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of springboard off of what Diraj said. When you're operating at scale, whether it's, roughly half of the same number of sites that Diraj has, but each one of them being a much larger physical scale, or in a very distributed, very broad reach like Diraj's company, you have to have the standards by which you're not only designing, but by which you're training people on as well. Imagine that every single one of your sites had completely different, not only designs, but different sequence of operations and all that. It would be a mess just to try and train up your own staff to operate those at a mission-critical type of availability model. So, focusing on the standards and getting it down to just, maybe a couple of basic designs and standardized sequence of operations. And this is one area that your company, Mark, has been really helpful with us. Schneider has done a great job of helping standardize on global master PLC, control systems, so that we can deploy as few as possible in terms of different sequence of operations and different designs.
Okay, for everyone's benefit, I'm going to start asking Joe and Diraj a few questions. If you have questions as well, please raise your hand, and I think a mic will come to you. The first question, and I'm not sure we scripted these, so it's up to you. I certainly want to get out of critical path, though. I'm going to start with Diraj on some of the geographical challenges he has with the multiple footprints. So when it comes to data, what were some of the challenges that your company specifically faced as you normalized this over your fleet, over the 50-plus markets that you were in? What did that challenge look like? Where are you at in that journey?
Yeah, and some additional context, right? We've grown to the size that we are, both organically and inorganically. So we've acquired as a big part of our growth. In acquisition comes a lot of opportunity, comes a lot of challenge as it relates to data. I'd say the core challenge for us, and I would argue for a big part of this industry, is it's not simply about aggregating, accumulating, refining, storing the data. I think it's very specific down to the transferability of the data. And what I mean by that is, or traceability might be a better description. What I mean by that is, I can go up to a piece of equipment in a data center that's in operation, and through our maintenance systems, I can find out everything I need to know about that equipment for the duration of its service life. Certainly, if I'm good, I can access commissioning data. If I'm very good, I can access installation-related data. What I can't do at the moment is access the data behind how that product or piece of equipment came to be, how it was designed, it's the phase of its manufacturing, and essentially thereby knit all phases of the end-to-end process surrounding that piece of equipment. And I really think with that we then we have the weave of the full end-to-end sort of description and information and data associated with equipment. And then I think we extrapolate that at scale, intensity, dispersion, and then I think we start to work wonders. And sounds like Google, are already well on their journey around that as it relates to manipulating the data and being intelligent with the data.
So I think I heard an ask in there. I'll keep going. Joe, you mentioned 19 variables. Why is 19 the magic number? Is it because that was too much data as is?
No, there was no magic number. It's just that when you start to look at all the things that could affect the power utilization, PUE, in a data center, there's about 19, and a lot of them are weather related. Because when you're using a water side economized or an air side economized cooling solution, changes in humidity, changes in temperature, and they have a dramatic impact on the cooling. And typically what's done is after a data center is commissioned and they've tested it operates within the curves in which it was designed, then the operators kind of leave those set points and they only go back and change it when something breaks. But it's a really inefficient way of operating a data center, especially at a large scale. When you're building a very large data center, it's going to take some number of months to fill it. So for a while, that data center is operating at low utilization. So why are you running all of the cooling skids when you only have, 1/10 of the IT load in there? Why are you running all of the cooling towers at full fan speed? Well, that's just because that was the way they were set up. So now having an autonomous control system that is constantly using the reinforcement learning and the basically gaining the insights from the billions of data points that we've gathered over the years on our data center operations to predict how best to set up the data center for those weather and IT related variables. And, looking at everything from differential air pressures to water flows and outside air temperature and wet bulb and all of those things. And when you add them up, there's about 19 that are impactful to reducing your PUE. And the numbers that we achieved are truly dramatic. Currently our fleet-wide average PUE across the world is 1.1, so about 10% overhead. And that's pretty good. Some of our best data centers operate at significantly better than that. But the variability, whether it's a new data center that is only lightly loaded with IT equipment or a data center that is running full out, the variability between those is next to nothing now. They all operate about that efficient. Second, we took the magnitude of the overhead and dropped it. The first gains that we got were roughly about 15% on the total overhead. And then recently, the model had been improved in second generation, and like I said, using full autonomous control, and they've gained another roughly 20% on top of that. So when you're at 10% total overhead, and to drop the total overhead associated with the cooling plant losses, it's pretty hard to do, and it was pretty amazing. And it's just something that sometimes the conditions that the AI system sets the mechanical plant up for, the operators look at that and say, there is no way, I've been doing critical facility operations for 25 years, there is no way I would have ever chosen those parameters for those pump speeds and those fan speeds and that many cooling skids online, and yet it's remarkable how well it works.
So let's play off of that a minute then. Where, from a Google perspective, when we talk about standardization, where do you balance the trade-off between innovation and standardization?
I think I have this discussion internally a lot because, of course, all of our engineering teams, they want to make things better, and I want them to make things better. We always want to innovate, and we put a pretty high priority on innovation in our company. But if you standardize properly, it actually enables innovation, and here's why. Let's say you, I don't know, you've got these modules. They're black boxes. If you standardize on the interfaces and the control schemes and the communication protocols across those modules, then within that module, within that black box, you can innovate and change things. As long as you have not changed the interface specifications and you have not changed the controls and the monitoring of that, it will work with the whole system. And so that's where standardization can really help you do fast-paced innovation. But it takes discipline.
I'm not going to ask you, Diraj. Do you have something to say?
So we can talk about this for hours. Standardization. I think this is what I would say about standardization. Just a quick few thoughts. I think it's a holy grail of a pursuit. We don't need to talk about the benefits of standardization. I think we understand that there are a lot of challenges not to standardize. Joe started talking about some of those earlier. There's environmental challenges, there's market challenges, there's customer challenges. Back to my little example of acquisition and integration. There's just your asset base. I think my old boss used to say something like, God built the world in six days, but he didn't have an install base to work with. But I would say, in its highest form, standardization for me is a philosophy. It's really being very formulaic around your end-to-end process. The process of design, the process of procurement, the process of who you procure with, the process of construction, commissioning, handover, and then ultimately operations. And I think Joe, we certainly didn't trade notes on this, but I was going to say immediately, as Joe said, that you can't innovate without a level of standardization, right? That's your target. That's your baseline. How do you improve if you don't know what you're improving against? So it's a core philosophy, and I almost like to be guttural about it. Right? For me, at the end of the day, it's about coming to a level of tribal culture and tribal language that's common in terms of the team's mindset and the partnerships as well.
Thank you. Nice articulation. Are there any questions from the audience? Anyone bold enough to share your ideas or where you're at in the journey?
Hi, good morning. It's Alfonso Marin from Colt, competitor of Equinix. We have the same issue as in standardization, especially because customers like Google comes and say, I want this for yesterday, and you are late because I wanted that for last week. So how do you, when a customer like Google, Microsoft, Amazon comes to you, how do you cope with standardization and delivery at the same time? And at the same time, you need to innovate because your PUE is 1.5 and they are asking for a PUE of 1.2.
Yeah, how do you deal with your big pain in the butt customers?
I'd say, and just because he works for Colt, I'd say you start off with a big balance sheet, which allows you to build speculatively, right? I mean, there's no shortcut to the end-to-end process, right? You start early, ideally, and you stay true to your principles. I think, but that said, and you try and do that, 80% of the time, right? 80-20 applies beautifully in so much of what we do, and to a point that you leverage that platform, which then allows you for the remaining 20% to turn on a dime and be in a position, to provide these sorts of solutions. I've lost it.
Pretty high-tech setup.
Yeah, sorry.
Need to go back to zero. Yeah. Can you dial this right here to 0? You're at 6.
Oh. Sorry, guys. But the last thing I want to say is, I think the industry is still learning. I'd say in the last year I've been personally very close to a lot of the requirements I'm seeing out of customers, such as the person next to me, and I can see a convergence. I can see a level of sharing, which only adds to the process of becoming standardized. I think it's a little too informal and unstructured at the moment, but I certainly see convergence to a point that this will make more sense most of the time. If we go back to the conundrum of deploying at scale, intensity, and dispersion, it has to. It's the only way to do it.
Thank you. Any other questions? I think I'd like to.
I would just like to add one quick comment, if I may. We want you to be successful ultimately, right? We don't want this to be a bad experience because we're counting on this to be part of our reliability equation as well. So I would ask that when you're requested to do things that are going to inject a significant amount of risk into the design or into your operations, please be open with us and let us know and have that dialogue and say, these are things that I can accommodate easily. These are things that are going to create a great deal of risk. Are you willing to accept that additional risk or not? And most of the time you'll find that good open dialogue winds up being a beneficial conversation.
So I'm going to move to the talent pool. Both of these gentlemen I know are committed in our industry to training the next generation as well as the gender diversity. So I applaud them. I also applaud Schneider in those efforts. Diraj, I'm going to turn this question to you, and especially with your dispersion again, where do you see some of the biggest gaps from a talent, skilled, competent, bandwidth talent-wise in your world today?
So this is a very easy answer. I was chatting about it 5 minutes ago. There's a bloke in the back there. His name's Julian. He works for Schneider. Julian is a core leader in Schneider and in the industry as it relates to controls engineering of sophisticated, complex power distribution systems. I think this is a massive pain point for the industry at the moment. I think, between Joe, ourselves, other big players, we probably all have large build projects and programs that are completely dependent on, I would say, a very finite few, relatively speaking, of these precious resources.
Okay.
So, Julian, that's an invitation to speak to Mark after this and have some important conversations.
Or give me your resume. That's okay too.
Which we'll end up paying for anyway.
I knew I couldn't control this at some point. So, Joe, when Google goes, you go big. You also go into some more isolated geographies versus a disparate footprint as Diraj does. So, can you talk to that a little bit in some of your public builds?
Yeah, typically, whereas Diraj's business model is primarily, and I don't want to speak out of turn here, but it's primarily focused on like the top 50 markets, right? The big major metro markets where everyone wants to be. If you're going to build a 1,000-acre data center campus, you're not going to find 1,000 acres of land available in Metro London or something like that. So this pushes us to.
That's why our pricing's so high, Joe.
Yeah, we'll talk about that after. But no, really. So we have gone into many more, I guess you'd call them rural areas. Parts of North America in the country parts of North America, in Iowa and flatlands and things like that. So at first it was very, very difficult. Even with the name recognition of Google, you would think that as soon as you post that we have a bunch of jobs open, you would get a flood of resumes coming in. And it wasn't the case. And so we studied it a little bit, and oftentimes it came down to a matter of awareness. You wouldn't believe how many of our operators and engineers that ultimately have been very successful in our program came to me and said, I had no idea a person like me could work for Google because I thought that you hired only software engineers. And I think that there's a general awareness issue in the industry that goes all the way down to the schools where the people are coming out of. I don't think that we as an industry do enough to talk about, what a career in this industry looks like and build the awareness with people that haven't even considered. I mean, they know large scale manufacturing, and they know, semiconductors, and they maybe know, pharmaceutical or something like that, but they have, no idea what is involved in a data center. And they have no idea that, there's a need for, dozens of different types of jobs, up to including, almost every single environmental engineer and technician on our staff had no idea that there were jobs for environmental engineers in a data center company. So I think that we have a real awareness problem, and we have to fix that. And we have to go broad and deep with every different type of training institution, be it, four-year universities and trade schools and technical colleges. And frankly, we also, at least in the U.S. I can speak to, we have a real problem with the trades themselves, the skilled craft people, because those unions had not been focusing on backfilling for their workforce that largely in the U.S. are now reaching retirement age. And so we have a huge gap. Again, I say that because oftentimes we'll wind up having some of our mission-critical operators coming out of the trades. And maybe they worked in helping to build the facility, and then they want to help come and run it and operate it. And that's a great pipeline of candidates, but that's drying up also. I mean, just the stats are roughly about nearly 500,000 shortage of electricians just in the United States alone.
Incredible. I don't know if who in this audience listened to the CNBC live broadcast today, but one of the ladies made an interesting comment that she feels we're teaching our kids some things that might be obsoleted or archaic. And her specific example was we have our kids memorizing the capitals of the countries throughout the world. So you kind of bled or stole my last question, which is what should we be doing differently as an industry? And I think you answered that. I can speak for myself here in my company. We have been approached by people on the stage and others in the industry to set up curriculums at the institutions, both in Europe and the U.S. I'm not aware of any actual fruit being harvested from those great concepts, but clearly as an industry, to Joe's point, it's going to become a numbers game at some point. And the other thing that I liked about the CNBC panel today was this digital era is about people, right? And I think we need to sometimes embrace that more than perhaps we are. So I'm going to wrap up. If you guys have any closing comments before I do.
No, I just think that, a lot of people always thought that data centers are so unique, but look around at other industries that are mission critical, and you're going to see a tremendous number of parallels. So people that have been working in other industries are maybe ready for a change. We need to help attract them as well.
Okay. So I'd like to thank both Diraj and Joe most sincerely. Again, a lot to share. If you can grab them a coffee or perhaps later on a cocktail, loads of wisdom and experience here that they're willing to share. What I'd like to do is just close with a quick summary then is I think through monetization of data, standardization of design, operation, and maintenance of the data center, moving into the talent pool as well. We can increase speed of deployment. Certainly, when I talk about lowering the CapEx and OpEx, when you're building 40 megawatts at scale, you need to do it smarter than perhaps we've been doing it in the past. Certainly, green sustainability becomes a big part of that equation. And then certainly, this whole conversation, the digitization of our industry really, and how we go about that envelope really should and does mitigate, reduce risk. So I would encourage, if I have the last slide, for folks to spend time with us in the hub just behind this wall. I'd like to thank you all very much. Certainly thank Joe and Diraj one more time. Thank you. Bye.